Hey, welcome everyone. Uh, Welcome to week one of the Leadership Alliance Professional Development Workshop Series. My name is Dr. Thais Bingham Hickman, Executive Director of the Leadership Alliance, and I will be the moderator for today's event. This event is a component of the Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series. The Leadership Alliance Executive Office and its partners created this initiative to ensure continuity of skill building, networking, and exposure to graduate programs for undergraduate and graduate students from all across the country. Paired with our Wednesday evening workshop series, we hope to expose you to a discussion of critical issues, allow you to network with each other and our wonderful doctoral scholars, as well as develop learning approaches and skills for navigating your research careers. This evening, I'm pleased to introduce doctoral scholar Dr. Cherie Lynn Ramirez. Dr. Cherie Lynn Ramirez is assistant teaching professor in the Chemistry and Physics Department at Simmons University, where she teaches courses in biochemistry, public health, and science advocacy. She is also associate faculty at Ariadne Labs, the Joint Center for Health Systems Innovation at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Among her research projects are studying institutional mechanisms that promote healthy workplaces and improving access to medicines, including COVID-19 rapid tests as a collaborator of Global Access in Action, a project of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. Her love of teaching and science blossomed as an undergraduate at Valencia College and later as a biochemistry, molecular biology, and classical studies double major at Rollins College in Central Florida. With the goal of being involved in teaching full-time someday, she participated in several teaching and mentoring activities throughout graduate school while earning her PhD in engineering. After graduating in 2012, she completed her postdoctoral training at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health with a dual appointment as a curriculum fellow at the Harvard Global Health Institute so that she could support faculty and graduate students teaching global health across Harvard University. After her postdoc, she was promoted to the Deputy Director of the Global Learning Studios at the newly established Global Health Education and Learning Incubator at Harvard University, where she developed strategies and capacities for supporting faculty experimenting with educational multimedia in collaboration with Derek Bok Center for Teaching and Learning. After joining Simmons University, she served as the inaugural Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics Faculty Fellow at the University Center for Excellence in Teaching. Dr. Ramirez participated in the SR-EIP at Harvard Medical School. Among her distinctions, she has been recognized as an American Chemical Society Scholar, a two-time winner of the prestigious Barium Goldwater Scholarship, and the recipient of graduate fellowships from both the National Science Foundation and the Ford Foundation. Dr. Ramirez has found her experiences living in Mexico, Spain, and Belgium, and traveling extensively within the United States and abroad to be among her most enriching catalysts for learning and inspiration. And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Ramirez formally to the session. Thank you so much for joining us. Such an impressive background.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Bingham Hickman.
Absolutely. So I know we have a number of student questions that have been submitted in advance of our discussion today. But before we dive into questions, would you talk to our audience a little bit about your journey and why you chose the path that you chose? Were there any personal considerations that factored into your decision as far as graduate school and then your career?
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's just such a pleasure to be here with you. And thank you for spending some time with us today. I hope that you find this useful. And I'm thrilled at all the questions that you've submitted. So, thinking back, the more removed I am from a couple decades ago, the harder it is to get back there, but it's been a fun exercise. I remember when I was an undergrad, I was finishing up, I was applying to grad school. I really loved my college experience, and I went to a small liberal arts school in Central Florida, Rollins College. And I had such great experiences there, and also at my community college, Valencia Community College at the time, now Valencia College. that I really wanted to be in a career in teaching. And I figured that I'd eventually get there. I'd have my experiences in research and whatnot, and then eventually I'd go and teach. So I actually um, ended up in a teaching career a lot sooner in my career than I expected. But when I was finishing up, I after my experience with the Harvard Medical School Leadership Alliance program and getting a chance to talk to a lot of folks, I knew that when I started my PhD program, I really wanted to be in a career in teaching. I love working with students. I love mentoring students. So that was always something I wanted to do. And when I was in my PhD program, that's what I told my PhD advisor, who's great, a really wonderful lab, very nurturing environment. And I told him I want to be able to teach. Can I please teach this semester or whatnot? And he did let me teach, but he also wanted me to focus on my research. So I didn't get to teach as much as I wanted to. And then I kept asking, can I teach again? Can I teach again? And he kept saying, well, you need to focus on your research. And by the time I got to my last year, I really wanted to teach. So at that point I said, can I please teach? And he said, well, you should probably focus on your research. He said, is that a yes or a no? And he said, well, you can teach if you want to. So I said, I did. And it was great that I did, because that's what actually led to me getting my position after my PhD program. I ended up teaching for one of the global health courses for Harvard undergrads. And that was what really got me interested in doing a lot more in public health. And some of the other research areas that sounds like some folks are interested in hearing more about. But I did that right after my PhD. I felt, even though I did a lot of bench science when I was a PhD student, I had already started to feel like I wanted to do something that promoted more health equity, promoted more, fairness in terms of sharing capacities, sharing research. So that was why I started to transition more into public health research rather than basic science. And so after I was at Harvard for a few years doing some work in educational multimedia and faculty development, the position opened up for me to teach at Simmons University, where I am now. It used to be called Simmons College, now it's Simmons University. And it's been great because I've been able to use my basic science training to teach biochemistry classes, but then I've also been able to teach some public health and continue my research in a variety of areas. So it's been a nice journey for me, and it's been wonderful being able to work with undergraduates again so soon, not only in teaching classes but also in doing research. So is that okay, or was there anything else there that I should keep going on before we get to questions?
No, that was great. And I guess building upon that, you mentioned, how you eventually ended up teaching. What experiences specifically led to your passion for scientific advocacy in public health? How did you wind up there?
Yeah, so that's the science advocacy piece is something I've been interested in for a long time. During graduate school, I was involved in a lot of science communication and you know um, some advocacy work itself, but also some of the teaching of how advocacy work is done. And I think actually that's grown a lot in there's been a lot more interest in that in the last few years. And being up here in Boston, MIT has a really big science communication operation. And so there have been a lot of events in the area. And then, of course, with the last couple of years, the whole, focus on information and disinformation and social media and all that stuff, I think has really um, um, increased a lot of the interest and a lot of the academic understanding of science communication and strategies to help ensure that the public is well informed, and to try to counteract incorrect or even misinformation that's spread on the internet. So, so I think a lot of that is just kind of what's been happening in the world that has driven a lot of that availability of resources and interest. And then when I was at Simmons, I had the opportunity to actually teach a course on science advocacy and science communication. That was a lot of fun to develop, and I've taught that course a couple of times. So it's been really interesting. In that course, students learn about different strategies, and they practice various communication and writing skills, and they have a projects where they select topics that they care about to do some advocacy on. So that's always a lot of fun developing a course and trying to help students learn things.
Great. And so one of the students asked or comments that their school does not offer science advocacy courses, and they want to know where they can find the resources and what are possible actions that undergraduates can take to involve themselves in advocacy in science.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Like I said, I think in the course that I teach, we have a lot of advocacy resources. I can try to sneak some in the chat maybe later, or maybe I don't know if I can give anything to you um, in terms of resources to share, but Google science communication. There are a lot of resources, not only from, like I said, there's a big science communication center at MIT. There's the there are and other institutions as well have their science communication operations. So there are a lot of handbooks that have been developed. I know that the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation and other organizations like that have been working a lot on their science community. There's some science, if you Google science communication toolkit, science advocacy toolkit, they have a couple of these that are that have a lot of good resources. And especially in terms of having conversations with people one-on-one, there's one really important principle is, if you just throw data at people, you throw information at them, you're actually more likely to get them to entrench themselves in their existing beliefs. So you have to be very careful about how you approach people, because a lot of times there's this uh, there's this sort of myth that, well, people just don't know any better. If I just throw more information at them, they'll change their minds, and that's actually not really how it works. So but especially with everything that's happened in the world and in the news the last couple of years, I think people are becoming more aware of a lot of the ways that things work, and how to do it in a way that alienates people less and engages them more, because that's one thing that's been true for a long time about science and science communication, that a lot of times scientists communicate in ways that aren't very welcoming to non-experts. We have conferences, we write papers, we do all these things that your average person maybe doesn't have access to, or isn't really written in a language that people can understand very well. So then it becomes, there's a lot of filtering of information that ends up sometimes, again, not really serving the purpose of sharing the information as well as possible to wider audiences. So I think not only are people in media becoming more aware and trying to do a better job, but also there's a lot more training for scientists to be able to become better communicators. I think in a lot of graduate programs now, there's a lot more training available than there used to be on that.
Thank you. And we have quite a few questions about your experience within the SR-EIP program with the Leadership Alliance. This is the first day of the program. Some of the students are probably on this call. So one of the students writes, if you were to do the SR-EIP program again in an undergraduate research experience, what would you do differently? And what advice would you give to students currently in an undergraduate research program?
Great question. I was thinking about that because I really enjoyed my summer experience so much. I just remember I was really absorbed in the whole experience, because I not only really enjoyed being in the lab and was in the lab a lot, but I also enjoyed spending time with the cohort of students, and getting to know the mentors for the program. And I ended up becoming, when I became a graduate student later at Harvard, I ended up becoming the peer mentor coordinator. So I got to choose people who came and served as mentors for the undergraduates, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, in terms of what I would do differently, honestly, especially because everything ended up working out really well and everything, I'm not sure I would change that much. I think there was one time that I my friend had gotten me tickets to go to a concert on a Friday night or Saturday night. It was something where you probably wouldn't normally be in lab anyways, but I was in lab and I really wanted to get something done and I was there. And then but he didn't tell me that it was a concert, so I ended up missing out on the first half of a Alanis Morissette concert, something I really would have liked to enjoy because I was in lab or I was working on something. So I don't want to say just blow off your experiments and do whatever you want, but there's also something to be said about having balance and starting early on that. So if you're working hard during the summer, you want to take a weekend off or you want to make sure that you can have dinner with your friends, trying to plan your experiments so you can have a healthy balance. I think there's definitely something to be said about learning those habits early and being able to, do good science and doing everything you need to do and being outstanding at what you do, but also making space for having friends and disconnecting a little bit and enjoying other things. So I would say I would say that hopefully in a way that doesn't sound um, like I'm not telling you to work really hard. I think everybody here, we've all worked hard. You've gotten here because you've been working really hard. But I think you also, I think there's this tendency, especially after you meet a lot of people who are in labs, like you're always going to see people who are there all the time, and they don't really they're not able to maybe or feel like they can't make space for other things in their lives because of the pressure of always doing a lot. So I've known a lot of very successful people who are very good at balancing things. So don't think that the only way to be successful is by shutting off everything else in your life, because certainly there are a lot of people who do a good job with balancing commitments and still being very successful.
Absolutely. And I was actually talking with the Brown summer students earlier, and I said the same thing. And I think it's important to build a network and build connections as you're, doing your summer research experiences, because you never know who you're working with or when you might need that person if they're working at a company in the future that you want to join or an academic institution. So I definitely would say build relationships, build friendships. That's one of the most important aspects of the program. Um, so we have a question from a student that is currently attending Rollins College, and
Oh,
she
hello.
says, "Hello, Dr. Yeah, hello, Dr. Ramirez. My name is Ingrid Ryan, and I'm currently attending Rollins College as an undergraduate student. During your undergraduate career, did you pick any experiences that increased your interest in obtaining a PhD, or was there a defining point when you understood, that this is what you would like to pursue?"
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's interesting because I think I just always wanted to get a science PhD. I was never one of, sometimes students are conflicted about different things they want to do, or they want to get a medical degree or do something else. For me, it just always felt like my next step. I don't know. And in a good way, it's always something that I looked forward to. I really enjoyed, having the opportunity to be in my program. I enjoyed being in my program, just and then the opportunities that it's opened up for me have been fantastic. So for me, it wasn't really anything. I, I don't know. I don't think there was a time. I don't even remember the time when I realized that scientists got PhDs or that was the pathway, that a lot of people follow. It was just sort of, I um, just always, just thought in that direction. And I was lucky because, at Rollins, we have offices that help, and I'm sure a lot of institutions do these days, where they, if you go and you tell them what you want to do, they help you become more competitive for applications. So you can go and you can share drafts with them and you can tell them what you want to do and get advice about what activities you should do to make yourself more competitive and things like that. So that's part of I know that a lot of you are probably interested in different scholarships, and you probably saw in the bio that I got the American Chemical Society scholarship and also the Goldwater scholarship. And so I think that was always something that helped make the path available to me, that I was always very fortunate to have good advice and good support so that I could apply for things. And it's like going up a stairway. If you start, you keep going up the steps, then eventually you get up the whole way, right? But if you don't, pick up everything along the way, then it's harder to reach up for, the next step. So I think I was just lucky that I kept, being able to climb and getting support, and, you all doing your summer programs here. It's just a really great, phenomenal way to get more information, to figure out what you really want to do to get to your next step. So I think that's great. You guys are all on the right path there.
Yes, and I am familiar with the Goldwater Fellowship. I serve on the committee for the review committee at Brown, and I know it's very competitive. So how did you actually find out about that opportunity, and what made you apply for the Goldwater Fellowship?
Another one of those things where I remember that because I had already done my 2-year degree before starting Rollins. I started with, I basically started as a junior when I started college. So I was able to apply really early on for the first time I got the Goldwater Fellowship and or scholarship. And so it's just on the list of things you apply for as a science student. It was just what they said, well, you should apply for this. I didn't really know what it was. But again, I had some good advice, and I think I had some good experiences that made me really competitive going into it. So I think it just worked out really well. Um, and I noticed, by the way, I saw in the Q&A that there were 2 questions here. I'm not sure if it's a good time to answer them or we should come back to them later. Searching for the right
Sure.
PhD. And then,
Yeah, sure. If you want to tackle those questions, feel free.
yeah, and then what made you decide to pursue your PhD as opposed to a master's degree? So the reason why is not only because I wanted to teach, so eventually, I'd probably need a PhD to be able to teach. I'd need a PhD in order to be able to teach at the college or university level. But also because a lot of times when you get a master's degree, you have to pay for it. So when you get a PhD degree, especially in the sciences, there's typically funding to be able to pursue that. So that was another practical reason why I just applied for the PhD to begin with. There are situations where, for instance, if you're changing fields, or maybe your undergraduate record wasn't as strong, or there could be a lot of reasons why you might want to pursue a master's degree. Maybe a master's degree is the recommended path for what you want to do. If you don't want to spend 6 years in a program, maybe a year or 2 is enough. So there might be a lot of reasons why other people might want to pursue master's degrees, but in my case, the PhD was what I felt like I needed, and I was able to get in and everything. So in terms of the right PhD program, I remember when I was applying, I actually thought of my application process as my summer application process, if that makes any sense. So back when I was an undergrad trying to figure out where I was going to go for the summer, I was thinking, well, where would I want to do my PhD? And so I applied to a bunch of schools, and then I got into the Harvard program, and that's where I wanted to do my PhD. So that's where I focused on applying later on. So I'd say that I think what you guys are doing is great, going to, doing summer research, trying to become familiar with what different programs have to offer. That's the best way to learn, so that when it comes time to apply, you can focus on the schools that you're most interested in, that are probably going to be a best fit for your interests. Oh, by the way, I just want to mention really quickly too, on the Goldwater Scholarship. I didn't actually know that you could apply more than once. And it's possible, especially if you apply early on. So, and I learned that through the Leadership Alliance when I was a summer student. I was talking to an upperclassman, and he told me, "Oh, I did that. I applied more than once, and he got it." So it's something that not a lot of people are probably in a situation where they could apply more than once. But if it happens, I think that there's still no rule against it. So you could apply more than once. Not only apply more than once, but get it more than once.
Thank you. We have some questions about your background. So one of the questions that came in, as a Latinx woman, did you find educational or systemic barriers within the academic environments that you worked in, or that you did your studies in? And if so, how did you cope with them?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that because again, I think we live in a time that's a lot more um, more aware of these barriers, and that there are more steps being taken to try to make them less of an issue. I just remember when I was trying to find a research mentor, I went on the website to find all the people that are in science in the program or the research area that I was looking at, and you just go on the website and you just have a lot of people who didn't look like me. I think a lot of that has also changed, even in the last 10 or 15 years. But I, I, there definitely have been times when I felt like, I'm the only woman in the room, or I'm the only, um, Hispanic person in the room. And uh, I, I just always remember, that it's important to not, not let that be not let that be discouraging. And also it's helpful because then when you have students, then they have someone that they can relate to, maybe in a different way. um, I also found it very helpful during my experiences, such as when I was in my summer research programs, that I would again spend a lot of time with the other students in my cohort and the other mentors and everything. So I also feel like that made it more um, I think that being having people to relate to and being able to share experiences makes it feel less isolating. So I think generally, I think my experience has been pretty positive. But definitely there have been a lot of times that I've been I haven't had a lot of people around me who look like me, and I definitely think that the awareness of that and the increase of opportunities for people to be able to to change that has gotten a lot better.
Thank you. And, based on your bio, it looks like you either lived and worked, in several places in the world. And so we have some questions about that. One of the questions, specifically, the students would like to know how that kind of shaped your desire to move forward in your career path, or either reshaped your career goals as far as traveling and living with different people from different cultures.
Yeah, I just I'm so grateful for having those opportunities. So there've been a couple of times, for instance, the summer after I did my Harvard undergraduate research experience, I did one in Belgium, and I was able to do summer research there. And I was also able to do a study abroad program when I was at Rollins, where I got to live in Spain. And because I'm a native Spanish speaker, so I was there to do the language and culture program. But even at the highest level, it was not incredibly challenging. It was fun. It was like a good level of challenge because it was fun. I was learning a lot, but I wasn't overwhelmed. So I had enough you know uh, enough sort of mental space to be able to do research as well while I was there. So I really enjoyed that. I loved being in the lab in Belgium and Spain. I remember when I was in Spain, I would spend time with the people at the lab, and they would ask me questions like, I don't know, like, why don't they teach evolution in schools in the US, Cherie? And I was like, I don't know. There's some places that have, I was trying to explain how the educational system works, and that there's a lot of um, there are a lot of differences between different states and different standards, and there's authority from granted from different places. And I don't know, there were just a lot of questions where I never thought I'd be answering certain questions, and they were very curious about how things work in the U.S. And it also made me aware of times in the U.S. where there's a certain amount of elitism as Americans, where everything's in English. Well, why is everything in English? It just happens to be that a lot of times, right now, the the lingua franca, or the language that's typically used for science, happens to be English. And so, as native English speakers, or people who are operating here in the US with English, it can make things a lot easier for us, but you also have to remember there are people, and some of the people here might have that experience where maybe English isn't your first language, or you're in a place where around the world, everybody else has to, speak English to be able to do some of these things. And so I think that sometimes we forget about some of those privileges and what happens when, maybe someday in 20 or 30 years, maybe English isn't the language of science anymore. Maybe it's, Mandarin or something. And, there are a lot of, I think that there are a lot of things that we take for granted right now that will become a lot more, that can become a lot more challenging. So I think it's important not to be, um, too arrogant or proud about that. It's important to acknowledge that we have this privilege, and to make it, to improve accessibility of science and accessibility of what's done, and also to have compassion for people maybe who, you know have English as a second language, or are having difficulties, because I think that it's a situation that a lot of people maybe don't realize until you're somewhere else and you're realizing uh, what kinds of challenges that creates.
And then building upon that, how have your experiences in other countries affected your view on public health and potentially changed your trajectory to go into either teaching or just into public health in general?
Yeah, I think I the whole public health piece, now these days, especially with the pandemic and everything, public health has had a lot more interest and a lot more attention on it, for better or for worse. Um, I think one of the things that's so fascinating about public health is that it's so important. And, there's so many discoveries that have saved countless lives, but yet it's it's also so underappreciated, and it's so difficult to get things done because you're trying to sell people on prevention. And a lot of times, prevention, sometimes it's not very expensive, but sometimes it can be. Sometimes it's hard to predict what's going to be the most um, effective, and there are a lot of competing interests, a lot of competing um, a lot of different priorities that are competing for attention. So so I think that it's been interesting, especially during the pandemic, to see how responses played out so differently. For instance, in New Zealand, where they were trying to keep the virus out entirely and succeeded for a long time, to what was going on, in Europe. There were a lot of differences in how different countries in Europe were responding. In the US, we had a lot of differences how different states were responding. And I think that it's it's good to remember that, there can be some very positive things, but there can also be some very negative things no matter where you are. And I think in the US, especially with healthcare and public health, we we don't do as good a job as we should of learning the lessons that we need to from other places so that we can do a better job. A lot of times, we think we have this American exceptionalism where we think that because we know best or we do things differently that we're going to do them the best. And a lot of times there's a lot that we can learn. So I think that's something we should all keep in mind, that especially the more that you travel, the more you see different people do things, you realize there are multiple ways of doing them, and that you need to have some humility around how you respond to problems, and trying to find the best solutions no matter where they may come from.
Yeah, and I think this question is particularly relevant based on what you just described. So one of the questions that came in, it's from an undergrad. It says, as an undergrad, you were a humanities and STEM major. How did your interest in studying these two different fields contribute to your research later on? Do you think that humanities, social science undergraduates would benefit from some degree of education in the hard sciences and vice versa?
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone should have to do everything. And I loved it. It was when I was in community college. I already, my main focus was biology and being in the sciences, but I took a mythology class and I thought, wow, this is so great. I didn't realize you could actually study this in college because I always thought, just like these fun stories that I would read or, movies that you would watch. And so when I got to college, I remember I was meeting with the chair of the classics department and she sat me down in her office. She said, well, Cherie, if you were a major, you could do all these things. Like she was trying to convince me to be a major. And I had to tell her, look, I think this is really fun. I just want to do it. But I guess she's used to trying to have to sell students on it. And, you know, the, I loved, all of that having, I had to learn Latin, I had to learn a lot about art and history. Um, and I think that you in terms of connecting with people and also how you think about problems, how you think about people have solved problems through time. There's just so much that you learn. The storytelling aspect of the humanities is really valuable as well. When you think about ethics, you think about philosophy. A lot of these things can just be um, so impactful and have such a big effect on how people think about problems and relate to other people. So yes, I think that there's definitely um, a great opportunity for scientists to learn about the humanities, but then also for people who in the humanities to not be afraid or to science. Um, I think it's just unfortunate sometimes people have negative experiences. And I have students like this all the time where they had a really, difficult experience in a math class or a science class, and then they come and they're afraid. And, I think that um that anything taught well can be learned and that there should always be opportunities for people to feel comfortable with things that maybe aren't as accessible right now.
Thank you for that. Um, we have a question about your current research projects. So this question reads, your biography mentions that many of your current projects study institutional mechanisms that promote healthy workplaces. I'm curious as to what broad categories of mechanisms you see at play, if you had to identify a few macro mechanisms, and how this relates to the internal organizational structure of various institutions. For instance, are horizontal, non-hierarchical organizations more likely to promote healthy workplaces? Does it differ by industry? So if you could address that.
Yeah, I think those are really great questions. Yeah, so in terms of healthy workplaces, it's interesting because there are a couple of industries where it's been studied extensively, but you know, you have humans everywhere. That's kind of the common denominator, and you know, in you can you can have healthy or unhealthy workplaces no matter what industry you're in. There's been a lot of focus, for instance, in healthcare, like in nursing. There's also in education. There are a couple of areas where it's been pretty extensively studied. But you look at the news, you look at a lot of these, you know, in business, in entertainment, in any industry you can think of, you have a lot of stories of workplace abuse, unfortunately, and some of it has to do with how reporting structures are set up inside organizations. So, for instance, a lot of times managers give feedback on their subordinates, but a lot of times subordinates don't really have a good opportunity to give feedback about their superiors. And so it just depends on uh, frankly, how little the organization tolerates abuse and how much opportunity there is for growth and feedback within the organization. Um, and a lot of times there are organizations that have in general healthier cultures, and it's something that can change over time too, that can drift into being unhealthy cultures or being unhealthy sort of foci or areas within larger organizations that start to develop problems. So I'd say, and turning that back into advice for folks, when you're interviewing to figure out like which job you want or which lab you want to be in or anything, it's always a good idea to talk to when they interview you, you also often, especially in the final rounds, you have an opportunity to talk to people from the organization or from the lab. And it's great to just try to, get as much open information as you can, because um, people might be willing to tell you if they think that it's a healthy environment or not. And the quicker you can figure that out, the better, because you definitely don't want to be in a place where a lot of times people aren't treated very well and they cycle through, and it's just not a good environment to be in.
Um, in your professional life, what has your experience as an assistant professor at Simmons been like, and how difficult was it to attain this position?
So I think I got really lucky because I was applying for this position over the summer. And a lot of times when you do faculty searches, you have to apply kind of even the academic year before. So, but every once in a while, opportunities open up kind of randomly. So just always good to keep your eyes open. So I just got really lucky that, they had someone lined up who, um, who decided not to continue with the position. And so they had to open up unexpectedly a search over the summer for a position that was starting that fall, or, a position that was going to be for teaching that fall. So I just got really lucky because it lined up perfectly with my experience and what I wanted to do. So, and I've been, um, continuing to look around for different opportunities. It's just always a good idea to keep your eyes open for what's out there. And so far, it's been the best fit for me that I've been able to find, because I really, again, I enjoy this subject area so much. I love chemistry. I also love public health. I love being able to do the things that I do. One thing that that you may learn more about as you go on is there are different types of faculty positions. There are contract or contingent faculty positions. There are also tenure or tenure track positions. And right now, mine is a contract position. So I'm looking for things that might be tenure track, if they become available at my institution or other places. Um, and, it basically means that you have a little bit more job security. And, especially if you plan to stay around for a while, it's, it's a good place to be. Um, I think was there another part of that question for the first half of
Oh,
that question? What was that again?
yeah, just, how did you obtain the position? So it sounds like you were researching for various roles, and this role happened to line up with your background, right?
Right. Okay, then maybe I did answer that one. I thought there was something else there too.
Um, so we have another question about, researching and navigating and finding opportunities. This one specifically for while you're in graduate school. So how did you apply for different activities and scholarships while you're in graduate school? Did you have any support or mentors, or what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, so when I was in graduate school, there was an office that helped people apply for competitive um, opportunities. Honestly, I didn't really um end up um working with them as much as I did when I was an undergraduate. I think it was just maybe because I was more focused. I already had a better idea about how to apply for things. And so when I applied for the National Science Foundation, and then also for the Ford Foundation Fellowship, I basically just applied for those independently. Um, I think the other difference too is, for instance, for some of the fellowships or scholarships, especially at an undergrad level, there's an internal process and then an external process. So there can only be a certain number of applicants from the school, or the school has to figure out who they're going to send for the national competition. So I think that might also be a little bit of a difference, where when I was in graduate school, I think I was kind of applying for things a little bit more independently. One thing that I regret is I wish that I had applied for more grant opportunities as a graduate student. because I did apply for the pre-doctoral fellowships, and I think those were really great. But I think in terms of applying for an NIH grant or applying for an NSF grant with my um, my graduate advisor, I kind of wish that I had done that. And I think that that also changed even within my program. They had a new component that was applying for a grant, I think, that got added later on. So I think I would recommend that, because that's one thing that I felt like I've been a little bit behind on, frankly, even as a faculty member, where I have tried to apply for some grants, but it's a lot more um, complex when you're applying for external funding for research. And I feel like if I had had a bit more experience, or had more support, especially with a more senior partner, that I think that that might have made it a little that would make it easier to sort of learn and be able to build on success. So that's something I've been working on, getting more access to mentoring and advice so that I can be, more successful applying for external grants.
Thank you. And this question wasn't submitted, but I was hoping you can touch on this a little bit, since we're talking about research, seeking out opportunities and resources. What role has scientific conferences or conferences in general played in your awareness of opportunities or your ability to network? We have our signature Lynn symposium every year. And so obviously you've been to that, but can you just talk a little bit about your experience in either presenting at professional conferences or just attending them, and how important they have been in your either your studies or your professional life?
Thank you. Yeah, I've had really great experiences at conferences in terms of meeting other people, even when you go and you go to little tables and you learn about different programs and things like that. That's been really helpful. Um I loved I went to SACNAS a few times, and also SHIP SHPE, is it shape ship the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And those were, I think they were great because they not only had a lot of the scientific programs, but also some cultural programming that was really interesting. And I think the opportunity to present is great, not only posters, but like talks, and also uh, having a chance to uh, interact with people in your field, and also just wandering around and learning about things that are outside of what you do. And I think what's really nice too is for interdisciplinary conferences, that you have a chance to widen your understanding of research, and what different research activities that people do outside the sciences. I think that's really nice too.
Thank you. And if you're an SR-EIP participant, we're hoping to see you all at Lands this summer. So I know it's been hard to attend conferences because of COVID. We will have a virtual format as well. So we're looking forward to that. So Dr. Ramirez, I'll let you take questions from the chat in the 10 minutes or so that we have left.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. Just trying to see what else we have here. Um, so there's a question about public health and sociology. So I'd say, yeah, that some of the research I do now, especially with the healthy workplaces, does have more to do with sociology. But I think there's such a huge range to what is in public health that that might not always be the case. Um, there's a question about applying for scholarships and writing research essays. So what I would, and it says, do you need graphs and tables or not? I would say that's a great time to go to, hopefully there's an office in your institution that helps you apply for competitive scholarships, or maybe you can go online and Google, there's probably advice about the scholarship, because you might be able to see a sample essay, or a lot of times the scholarships have FAQs, or there's someone you can write to ask questions. There's like an administrator. So I would say it's a good question, and you might be able to find some, especially if there have been successful applicants from your institutions before, and you may be able to look at those materials. You might see, what a successful application looks like. That can be really helpful. I remember the first time I applied to Goldwater, they had an application from someone who'd applied a couple years before and gotten it, and I found that really helpful because I'd never seen what that looked like before. Oh, science. There's a question here about science, about having scientists in politics. And actually, yes, after the last couple of years, in terms of what's happening with politics and science, there have been a lot of efforts to try to get scientists into politics. There are also some fellowships that you can do to as a scientist who wants to learn more about policy, like I think it's called the Mirzayan Award, and there's some other fellowships. So definitely something to look at. What to keep in mind when trying to decide what to pursue in grad school. Yeah, I think especially if you're not sure, um, yeah, if you're not sure and you're trying to apply for graduate school, that might be a good opportunity to decide whether you might want to work for a year or two and try to focus your attention more, because grad school can go by really fast. So if you're not sure what you want to do, that might be a good idea. I've known a lot of people who did that, and I feel like they ended up having a lot more focus when they were in grad school. So don't feel like, oh, I got done with my undergrad degree, I have to go to grad school right away. It may help to take a little bit of time and really think through that and get more experience before going to grad school. So this might be a question for you, Dr. Bingham Hickman. There's the SR-EIP program, what's the best way to network with people that aren't in my research group? I don't know if there's like a social hour or something, like virtually, or if there.
Yes, so there are activities that we, excuse me, that we will plan, and that your research institution will plan, social activities where you'll get to know your peers. So I would highly encourage you to join those activities. And also, like we were talking about earlier, the research symposium, the LANS Research Symposium is a great way to network with peers across disciplines, because you're actually able to go see other posters and presentations that are not in your field. And so that's a great way to network and get to know folks outside of your field. So I would highly encourage you, and if it's not a LANS, then maybe it's another professional conference that you attend.
Great. And then there's this other one about advice for students who have limited lab experience, and if there are any lab remote opportunities for students interested in pursuing an MD PhD.
Yeah, so I think, the best piece of advice I would say, if you have limited lab experience, is to just seek out opportunities. And I think, all of those that are on the call today obviously took that initiative, whether you're part of the SR-EIP program or you're just joining because you learned about this professional development series. That's a great way to learn about resources that are out there and how you can get involved. You've already taken the first step. So I would say definitely continue to participate in opportunities such as this, and then doors will start to open for you.
And especially if you don't have a lot of lab experience, you might try to look within your own institution. There might be a lab, even a smaller lab, where you can start to get experience. So there might also be a local hospital or a local research, center or something. It just depends on where you are, but there are definitely ways you can get experience, and then that can build toward other applications that you might have or other things you want to do. Advice for students studying molecular biology who'd like to apply for fellowships in public health or global health. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that, for public health students, I think if you can take a public health course, even like an introduction to public health course at your undergrad institution, that's a really great way to start to become acquainted with the different aspects of public health and which ones you might be most interested in. And then talking to the faculty, the public health faculty in your institution, and seeing, there might also be like an internship experience, or there might be something that you can do. You might also be interested, even if you do a PhD, you might be interested in doing something like an MPH, a master's in public health. They're only a year or two. And if you really want to do a lot more in public health, that's a good degree to get. People were asking if there are people in the PhD cohort who couldn't secure jobs or went into industry instead. There are definitely a lot of people who went into industry. I think, a friend of mine was reflecting on his own cohort, and, there were a lot of people who happened to end up in industry. I think there were only like a third of them ended up being academic scientists. Were you going to say something else about this one?
No, I was just, I think just to be mindful of time, because I know a lot of folks have started their programs today and there's a lot on their schedule. I think maybe if you could take the next question, and then we will wrap. I just dropped a link in the chat for the Google site, which has all of the content specific to the workshops that will be happening this summer. And if you have questions that were not answered that you'd like to reach out to Dr. Ramirez on separately, she will leave her contact information for us. So thank you, Dr. Ramirez. I'll let you take the next question.
Yeah, thank you. Just roadblocks in undergrad or grad years. I'd say I fortunately didn't have anything really major, but it was just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and, just continuing on. So I just say, just don't get discouraged. Make sure you have friends and colleagues and people you can turn to when things get rough. And that definitely helps a lot. And then opportunities or program for Hispanic or Latinx students. I definitely recommend trying to attend a SACNAS conference or the SHIP, those communities. I found that personally to be really helpful, to have a lot of people who have academic and personal experiences that I can relate to. And so I wanted to thank you all for being here and listening, and all the great questions and interests. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope that some of this was useful. I look forward to hearing about what all of you do in the future, because I'm sure you're all going to be doing really interesting things over the summer. And so I wish you all the best, and I hope you have a lot of success now and in the future, and that you keep doing great things.